Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nick Burney. I'm a developer advocate on the Google Ads API. Today, I'm joined by several of my colleagues. We're going to introduce a really exciting new concept to Google Ads. We're adding the hotel ads feature directly into the advertising platform. And this means that your hotel listings can show up directly on the Google homepage, just like any other advert. So I'd like to introduce my colleagues who are joining me today. On my right, in the same room, coming live from London, is Mattia Tomasoni.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Mattia, happy to have you here. I'm a developer advocate based out of the London office, so I work on the Google Ads API just as Nick. And among other things, I'm also one of the maintainers of the client library for PHP, so if you work with Google Ads in PHP, then we probably interacted, or at least you've interacted with some of my code. And then we also have some other colleagues in some other offices.
Yeah, let me introduce you to Devin Chasanoff. Devin's in our NYC office, sunny New York City.
Hey everybody, I'm Devin Chasanoff. As Nick said, I'm based out of New York City. I'm one of the developer advocates on the team. I also help out with the client library for Java. And I'll be talking to you all in a bit about listing groups and reporting. So stay tuned.
Fantastic. Thank you, Devin. So, and we're joined today by a very special guest, Son Lee from the engineering team. Son's out of the Boston office. Do you want to say hi, Son? You're muted, Son.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Son, and I'm based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm a software engineer working on the Google Hotel Ads.
Beautiful. So I think we've got 16 people tuned into the stream already. The recording will be left up and available afterwards. So if you want to tune in later, you want to recap on some topics, please go ahead and do that. We'll have some questions and answers. I've already added the link. There's a sort of an online question and answer forum where you can ask questions and upvotes or popular questions, things you'd like us to answer today. Have a look. It will be displayed on the screen, and it's in the description of the YouTube video as well. So with that, I'll hand over to Mattia. Mattia is going to tell us about hotel ads.
All right, let's get started with the content for today's webinar. So as Nick mentioned, this is going to be about hotel ads and specifically about how listing groups and reporting works. So first of all, you can download a copy of the slides for today's webinar. So there's some links and some text on the slides. So we do have a link where you can download a copy of the content we're presenting, which is going to be useful for you to follow along. The only thing we ask for now is please don't share this externally on like social media or blogs and anything like that, because it's something we're not ready to share externally yet. Then, just like Nick mentioned, we also have an application for Q&A where you can basically submit questions at any time so that you don't have to interrupt, or we don't have to interrupt the flow. We're going to have a Q&A section at the end, and you can also upvote some questions. So we're going to be answering the questions that you will be asking in order of priority and in order of the number of votes. So if you want to have a question answered, just upvote that and make sure it goes to the top. So this is not the first webinar we've ever done, and specifically, it's not the first one we've ever done on hotel ads. So we did a couple last year. In spring, we had one on an introduction to the Google Ads API. Then we had one specifically about hotel ads, which we're going to be referring to often today. And then we also had another one last winter. So what we will be seeing today is we're going to be doing a refresh of what the Google Ads API is and how campaign management works, specifically when working with hotel ads. And then Devin is going to talk to you about listing groups and reporting, and then we're going to have the Q&A section. So first of all, what is the Google Ads API? Is the next generation of what we used to be the AdWords API. So we used to have an AdWords API, which have been around for basically 10 years. And now we also have the new API, which is called Google Ads API. So it came around basically around the same time when we rebranded AdWords to Google Ads. So it's fairly convenient since we can call the Google Ads API with the Google Ads branding. And what is also very cool about it is that not only it's now ready for release and for people to use because we just released version 1.0 in March. But the coolest thing about this, specifically related to this webinar, is that the Google Ads API actually has native support for hotel ads. So this means that you don't have to use any other APIs or Google products to use hotel ads, but you can do that just with one single API. So what you used to do in the past was to use the Hotel Ads Center and the Travel Partner API to advert and to advertise your hotels on the Google network. And these were basically the concepts that you had to deal with. So you had the idea of an account, which had one or many sub-accounts. Then every sub-account had campaigns, and then every campaign had a budget and a bidding strategy, and every campaign had some ad groups, which had some bids and bid multipliers. And then every sub-account had a set of hotel groups and hotels. So these are basically the concepts that you had to deal with Hotel Ads Center and the Travel Partner API. So you had accounts, sub-accounts, campaigns, ad groups, hotel groups, multipliers, and hotels and their prices. And these are the concepts that you're having to deal with the Google Ads API. So most of them are actually the same. So a campaign is a campaign, an ad group is an ad group, but there are some differences. So for instance, the Google Ads API doesn't have the notion of a sub-account, although you can still manage an account hierarchy in case you're, for instance, a third party that manages different hoteliers. The Google Ads API has the concept of a manager account that can manage different accounts, but it doesn't have the idea of sub-accounts. And another key difference between the Google Ads API and what we used to have with the Hotel Ads Center and the Travel Partner API is that now you also have to create ad objects, which is something we will see in a bit, but it's basically something that needs to be manually performed, whereas in the past it used to be transparent. Another slight change is that what you used to call bid multipliers in the past in Hotel Ads Center and the Travel Partner API are now called bid modifiers, but the idea is exactly the same, and we'll see this in a bit. So I'm going to give you a brief review of how creating and managing campaign works with the Google Ads API, and this is basically going to be a refresh of what we've seen in the previous Hotel Ads webinar. So I'm not going to go too much in detail about this, and in case you want to have more details, you can, of course, refer to the previous webinar, which goes more in depth. So first of all, these are the entities that we deal with the Google Ads API. So again, we have an account, we do have campaigns, and then every campaign has a budget and a bidding strategy. And it also has one-to-many ad groups, and every ad group has a list of ads. Then every ad group also has a set of criteria, which can be, for instance, keywords or other different objects, but specifically with the hotel ads, an ad group criterion is basically a hotel group. And this works a bit differently from how it used to with the previous APIs, and Devin's going to talk to you about this in detail later. But for now, just be aware of the fact that hotel groups now are related to an ad group, and they're not basically on your account level. So this means that you can have a higher degree of granularity and specificity when defining how you want to bid for your ads. So, okay, we've mentioned that the Google Ads API doesn't have the idea of a sub-account. And then another key difference is that you need to have what we call an ad object. So it's an entity that you didn't used to have in the previous API set, but now it's something that you need to create. And in the end, it basically looks exactly in the same way that you're used to, like in the front end, in what end users actually see. So as I just mentioned, hotel groups are no longer an entity that exists at an account level, but it's basically on an ad group level. So this, again, Devin is going to talk to you in detail about this soon, but just be aware that you have an entirely new level of granularity in this. So what are the steps that you need to take to create a campaign with hotel ads? First of all, of course, you have to create a hotel campaign. So you just create a campaign object, you set the advertising channel to hotel ads, and then a required step that you have to take is to set the hotel center ID. So you basically link this campaign to your hotel center account. And if you ever worked with the shopping campaigns, this is kind of similar to what happens when setting the merchant center ID in a Google Ads campaign. The next step is to create an ad group, which is basically a group of ads that belong to a campaign. So as we've mentioned, at this level of the hierarchy of entities, the listing groups, so the hotel groups actually reside. So you specify your listing groups for each ad group, and you also set the CPC bids for every ad group, which means exactly how much you want to pay for every click. Then you create the ad object. So it's called an ad group ad in Google Ads API lingo, and it's basically the advertisement object that is going to appear to end users. And then optionally, you can also set bid modifiers for each ad group. So this is basically how bidding works. So we've mentioned earlier that every campaign has a bidding strategy, which in the hotel ads case may be manual CPC or percent CPC. So it's basically about saying whether you want to pay like 50 cents per click, which is the case for manual CPC, or 5% of the booking price per click, which is the case of percent CPC. And then you define the strategy on a campaign level, and then you define the actual bids on an ad group level. And then you can also override the bids on a listing group level and using bid modifiers. So how do bid modifiers or bid multipliers, as they used to be called in the Hotel Ads Center, work? You can basically adjust your bids depending on some criteria. Say, for instance, you may adjust your bids depending on whether users search for some very specific dates or just generically search for a hotel. Or you can adjust your bids depending on how long in advance users are looking to book a hotel. Say, for instance, you can bid lower or higher for last-minute bookings or for bookings made well in advance. Then you can adjust your bookings based on the length of stay in terms of the number of nights, and you can also adjust your bookings, adjust your bids in terms of which day of the week users are actually looking to book. So again, if this was basically a refresh on what we said in the previous Hotel Ads webinar, so it was just like a sum of what we said. If you want to have more details about this, just go watch our previous webinar, which is on the same channel on YouTube. And then, this being said, I'll just hand over to Nick.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, I see nobody's asking any questions yet, although one has actually just come in. So that's great. But if anyone would like to ask questions, like, please take advantage. We're all here. Son in particular has taken time from implementing hotel ads. So if there's anything you'd like to ask, now's the time to do so. So with that said, the chat looks nice and quiet just now. I'm going to hand over to Devin, and Devin's going to talk to you about the reporting side.
Great. Thank you, Nick. So for anyone who tuned in late, my name is Devin Chasanoff. I'm a developer advocate for Google Ads. I'm based out of New York. So let's kick things off in listing groups by talking about how to create and utilize groups with the Hotel Ads API. First, let's talk about how to actually create a listing group tree, which is the diagram that you see on the right of the slide. And a listing group tree is an abstract way of organizing your hotel's inventory listing dimensions, things like hotel class, brand, region, and so forth. That way you can automatically place bids for each hotel in your inventory based on its dimension classifications and where it falls in the tree. Further, the structure of the tree ensures that the hotel has one and only one bid. As you can see in the example on the right, this is a listing group tree with 3 different levels. So we have one level for the route, one for the hotel class, and then finally a third level for the number of, for the hotel country region. So as you can see, the tree itself contains several nodes, and we can classify those nodes into one of 2 different types. We have subdivision nodes, and we also have unit nodes. Subdivisions are the internal nodes of the tree that will be further partitioned into additional nodes, whereas unit nodes are the leaves of the tree, like the 5-star or the 4-star nodes. When you actually go to set your custom bids for these various criteria, you would only do so on the unit node. So looking at this tree, you would be able to set a custom bid on the 5-star node, the 4-star node, but that green other node is clearly a subdivision node since it's being partitioned. You would not set a bid on that node. Finally, it's important to keep in mind a few rules when working with listing group trees. First, all subdivisions must be complete. And by that, we mean each subdivision has to have at least one child node that's characterized as other. And that node itself can be either another subdivision or a unit node. As you can see in this example, the other node in the class level, that second row, is a subdivision, whereas the other node in the country region, the third row, is a unit node since it's not divided any further. Second, let's talk about some constraints. You can see these on the slide here. The maximum number of levels that a tree can have is 7, and the maximum number of listing groups for the whole tree is 20,000. Finally, each listing group tree must have at least one node to be valid, and hotel ads need a valid tree in order to serve. In the most basic example, you can have a single node tree with just a root node of unit type, though it wouldn't be particularly interesting. We're going to go through all of the various components of trees, how to make them, more detail about these other nodes as we progress through the slides. But if you want to learn more and you want to dive in after this webinar, feel free to click the link at the bottom left of the stage of the slide. That way you can learn a little bit more. Next, we're going to talk about how to create the listing group tree that we saw on the previous slide and link it to the ad group criteria. So that way we can set bids on each of the different nodes. If you recall, this diagram will be focused on the portion highlighted with the red dotted box. Let's take another look at the listing group tree. As I mentioned, we'll be using this tree to set specific bids on different hotels depending on where they fall in our tree. And to accomplish this, we have to create an ad group criterion for each node in the tree. And in actuality, this is really just a tree of ad group criteria nodes, each of which contains the listing group information. Let's take a closer look at this 5-star node. We'll zoom in here just to get a better idea of what's going on. So as I just said, we'll represent that node in the Google Ads API as an ad group criterion that contains several pieces of information. We have the resource name, its ad group's resource name, some other relevant information, and then finally we have our listing group information. The listing group information contains the node's type, whether it's a subdivision or unit node, its parent ad group criterion, which we'll come back to in just a second, and the case value. This is what we'll use to actually describe the node. For example, in this case, we've set the hotel class to a value of 5, as you can see. We could have alternatively set that value to be a different integer, such as 4 if it's a 4-star hotel, or alternatively, we could use a different dimension there, which we'll see in another example shortly. Next, let's talk about how to link these ad group criteria together to create the tree structure we see here. So let's focus on the relationship between the root node and the 5-star node to demonstrate, because the relationships throughout the rest of the tree are going to follow the same pattern. In our tree, the root node is the parent to the 5-star node. And as I mentioned already, the listing group contains a field of the parent ad group criterion. And this is probably what you'd expect it to be. It's the resource name of the ad group criterion of that particular node. So in this case, we would enter the resource name of the root node as the parent ad group criterion for the 5-star node. And as you can see in the dotted line, the resource name of the root node is in fact the exact same as the parent ad group criterion for that 5-star class node. Furthermore, there's a few things we should also note about the tree as well as the root node. First of all nodes in the tree have to have the same ad group resource name. That's because the entire tree is connected to a single ad group, so all of the different nodes have to be associated with that ad group. Next, take a look at the listing group info. You can see that the root node has a type of subdivision because it's being partitioned into other nodes. In addition, you can see that the parent ad group criterion is empty. It has to be empty because the root node, being the root of the tree, has no parent. And finally, the root node is a special case, and then it must have an empty case value. So if you look at the 5-star node there, the case value is a hotel class object, whereas on the left, the root node's case value is just empty. Next, let's focus on listing dimensions. We've already discussed these several times, but the dimensions are various categories that you can use to partition your tree and segment your hotels. So far, we've been working with the hotel class and hotel country region, but on the right, you can see the 5 possible listing dimensions available for use with the API, and we plan on adding some more dimensions in the future. If we take a look at the listing dimension group object, you can see that its listing dimension info field is what's called a contains one of field. This concept comes from protocol buffers, and it basically just means that there are numerous options for the listing dimension info type, such as the 5 shown on the right, but you can only use one per listing group. If we were to look at the second row of our tree, we need to specify the hotel class field, which stores the hotel class info, in this case, the number of stars that the hotel has. One important thing to note is that if you were to look at the listing dimension info in our documentation, which you can do by clicking that link at the bottom left of the slide, the one that says listing dimension info, you'll see several other listing dimensions other than the 5 shown on this slide. So keep in mind, only the ones shown here are applicable for hotel ads. The other options you'll see, specifically those beginning with the word product, are related to shopping ads and are not relevant for hotel ads. Let's now talk about setting the case values of these other nodes in our listing dimension tree. If you were to create the United States node in the country row of our tree, you would use a code like the one that's shown here. As you can see, the case value of the listing groups field uses hotel country region as its one of value. This is very similar to how you created the case value of the listing groups for hotel classes, the difference being that we use the country region criterion instead of the hotel class. In addition, while the hotel class object accepts a value as a parameter, just an integer like 4 or 5, the hotel country region field accepts a country region criterion object, which in turn takes a resource name as its parameter. You can learn more about these resource names by following the link at the bottom of the slide, but this is basically what uniquely specifies what region the ad group criterion should be targeting. So the number there, 2840, refers to the US, but you can use different values for cities and regions and other options. And you can learn more about each of these listing dimensions and what values they accept as parameters by checking out the docs. Now, if we look at the other node in this same row, you'll see that there are some similarities and some differences in the case value of the listing group. First, you'll notice that the hotel country region is empty because an other node must have an empty value for its listing dimension. However, the case value is not empty. and it has the same value as the hotel country region as the United States node. You can see that on the left, we have hotel country region. We have the case value of hotel country region with the country region criterion filled in, whereas case value of hotel country region on the right is not filled in. This is because each node in a given row must have the same case value type. Otherwise, you'll get an error when you go to create the tree. We've now seen how to create a listing group tree of various ad group criteria containing different listing dimensions. As part of that, we have learned that in order to give a listing group tree its structure, you have to specify the parent ad group criterion to describe the parent-child node relationships in the tree. However, up to this point, we have only used dummy values for the resource and parent resource names. When you actually create a listing group tree, you need to leverage temporary IDs, and let's take a look at why that is. As I mentioned earlier, a listing group tree is not valid until it's complete, meaning that if you create a subdivision, you also have to create at least one child node in the same request. However, the ad group criteria are not issued IDs and therefore resource names until after they're created by the server. This presents something of a chicken and an egg problem in that we need a child node to complete the request, but the child node needs a parent node resource name in order to be valid. To solve this problem, we use temporary IDs as placeholders to specify the node relationships. Temporary IDs can be any negative integers that are locally scoped within a given mutate request. And it can be any negative integers, and they are locally scoped within a given mutate request. And as a best practice, we recommend starting with -1 and decrementing for each new ID. Let's take a look at an example. So here, we have the same listing group tree we have been working with throughout the entire presentation. When we create our root node, you can see that the listing group type is a subdivision because it's being partitioned. And as a result, that node must have at least one child to be valid. In order to achieve this, we'll specify a resource name for that root node that ends with the ID of -1, which you can see at the top right of the screen there. Then, when we go to create any of the class nodes, such as the 5-star class node, we use that resource name, the one ending in -1, as the parent ad group criterion value. And we can do something similar for the 5-star node. However, because this node is a unit node, it technically doesn't require a temporary ID or resource name. It's optional. But for the sake of illustration, you can see that we can create additional resource names by specifying other unique negative integer IDs. In our case, we'll decrement by 1, giving this a resource name that ends with -2. But we could keep decrementing for each new ID using -3 for the next one, -4 after that, and so forth. Finally, let's review a summary of the different listing group types. We've covered a ton of information in this section, so it's important to review a few key concepts on this final slide about listing groups. There are two different types of listing groups, which you should probably know by now, units and subdivisions. The first row of this table shows an ad group criterion with a unit type listing group. And because unit nodes are the leaves of the tree, we can set bids in the ad group criterion. And you can see here, we have a %CPC bid of a value of 0.3 here. In addition, the case value contains a listing dimension with the value specified. Here we can see the hotel class has a value of 5. The second row of the table shows a subdivision node. And as you can see, the ad group criterion has no bid set for this one. In addition, its listing dimension of hotel class is empty. However, because this node shares a parent ad group criterion with the node in the first row, we know that these two nodes are in the same row of the tree, and therefore they have the same case value, the field of hotel class. So in the first one, the case value is hotel class with the value of 5. In the second row, the case value is a hotel class object, which is empty. Finally, the last row shows an example of a root node, which technically can either be a unit node or a subdivision. When actually building listing group trees, your root nodes will most likely be of the subdivision type. Otherwise, you'll just have a single node tree, which can be valid, but just isn't very interesting or useful. Now that we've had a chance to look at listing groups in detail, we're going to shift our attention to another important topic in the Hotel Ads API, reporting. So before we jump into reporting for hotel ads specifically, it's important for you to understand how reporting works in the Google Ads API at a high level. So as mentioned by Mattia at the beginning of the presentation, you'll be using the Google Ads API in order to make queries about your hotel ads. One of the biggest changes we've made in releasing the Google Ads API is how we retrieve data. So regardless of whether you're retrieving one-off items or a large set of information for reporting purposes, the new Google Ads API uses a special search method on the Google Ads service resource that takes a search query as a parameter. That search query is a string created using the Google Ads query language, or GACL for short. The Google Ads query language is an SQL-like query language that allows you to select what fields and metrics you'd like to retrieve for a given resource. And you can also specify filtering conditions. You can limit the number of results you get back. So if you've used SQL or other query languages in the past, you should feel right at home. It is important to keep in mind, however, that GACL is not SQL. For example, GACL does not support the select star operator. It also doesn't support group by or join operations, but those two are in a way built into the syntax of the language itself. We would definitely recommend checking out the link at the bottom of this slide to learn more about the Google Ads query language. So let's take a look at the generic example. And this really doesn't have anything to do with hotel ads specifically, but it's more so to help you understand how to conduct reporting with the Google Ads query language. So here you can see a search query that specifies what fields we'd like to see. Ad group criterion.keyword.text, ad group.name, campaign.name, as well as what metrics we'd like to get, impressions, clicks, CTR, so forth. As a side note, this is what I meant by when I said the Google Ads query language inherently supports joins. We can just take those metrics and throw them directly into our select clause. We don't have to perform any joins this way. We select this data from the keyword view. We'll filter by date to only include the last 30 days, where ad group status is enabled and ad group criterion status is either enabled or paused. Each row in the response we receive will contain the information we queried, as you can see at the bottom of the slide. If we take a look at this next example, you can see how to limit your results to only include hotel ads. And you can do this just by specifying where ad group.type equals hotel ads. And all you'll get as a result are hotel ads. And while you can certainly follow this very intuitive method, I'm going to show you a few tools, some better alternatives for more powerful and robust reporting with hotel ads. One useful alternative is to use what's called the hotel performance view. And I did kind of gloss over this when I was talking about the keyword view on the previous two slides, but views in Google Ads API are useful read-only resources containing related metrics, segments, and fields that you can pick and choose from to easily create a custom report. The hotel performance view contains various metrics related to hotel ads reporting, such as hotel average lead value, for example. And as I mentioned earlier, you can use metrics directly in your search query rather than using joins. Similarly, you can use segments instead of group by to aggregate data or to select a subsegment of data. One thing to note is that the hotel performance view is agnostic of any specific listing group in that the data returned from this view includes data across all listing groups. In order to view data by specific listing groups, we have another view that we recommend using that I'll cover in just 2 slides. So now that we know how to construct queries using the Google Ads query language and we understand the utility of the hotel performance view, let's take a look at an example. So here you can see the various hotel-related metrics for which we would like to see data. In addition, we have the segments we'd like to group our results by, so we'll get a unique row in the response for each combination of those segments. This example focuses on hotel ad specific segmentation and getting impression share data, which can be really valuable to our hotel partners. You may notice that we haven't included metrics.clicktype in our select clause. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But while this field is valuable in the hotel performance view, and we know it's very useful, it's available, it's just not selectable with impression share metrics. In the Google Ads query language, clicks and impression share data are mutually exclusive. So if you did want to include click type in your select clause, you simply need to remove the impression share data. Finally, let's take a look at the other useful view when working with hotel ads, the hotel group view, which can be used to view data about specific nodes in your listing group tree. So with this view, you can look at ad group and campaign level segmentation of specific metrics. And while hotel ad specific segmentation is not available in this view, you can view various metrics such as impressions, clicks, and costs on a per node basis. And that can be really useful when you want to compare nodes on an apples to apples basis. So with that, you've now learned how to create listing groups and how to conduct reporting with hotel ads. So I'll hand it back to Nick to go over some resources with you all, and then we'll go through some Q&A.
Thank you very much, Devin. All right, we're back. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Like, it was really interesting for me to hear about all the great stuff that's coming to make hotel ads possible in the API. We've got a bit of time left, actually. We're running a bit ahead of time. So there's a few questions. I think we should hand over Mattia. Are you presenting the questions?
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Okay, let's go through them.
Yeah, let me just, okay, first of all, the top question we got is this one. So do you recommend that we programmatically generate our resource name, or should we always get resource name by using Google Ads queries? So the idea is basically that a resource name is a unique identifier for a Google Ads object. So it's a unique identifier for a campaign, for an ad group, or whatever. And just like Devin showed you earlier, when you create an entity, you set a negative resource number, basically in the resource name. But then what you get back is a generated resource name that contains the entity ID. So it may be the campaign ID or the ad group ID. So that means that you cannot generate your own, but you can only use what you get from the Google Ads API, as it is the identifier it used internally by the Google Ads API.
For real identifiers, for entities that exist in the ad system already. From a practical point of view, if you use our client libraries, we have resources available in there. There's a small utility in all the libraries that generates a resource name given variables. So for instance, for a resource that has customer ID and campaign ID, you just give it two long values, 64-bit integers, and we'll construct the resource name for you, and you can just sort of pass that through as a string. If you're using REST, somebody asked earlier about REST. If you're using REST, it's probably going to be convenient for you to build something similar. Perhaps you could even use one of our client libraries to give a basis. The actual generation of these is pretty straightforward. We actually published the protocol buffer files, which would give you the definition of all the resource names in there. So yeah, have a look at that. It's linked from the developers.google.com site. I believe it's under resources or support and policies, I think it's linked under, or libraries and examples. Yeah, libraries and examples, you can get the protocol buffers.
Speaking of resources, I think we skipped over the resources slide there.
That is true, but I was planning to do that after some Q&A.
Okay, we could do that.
Right, so next question, which is actually it's not the only other question we have. So next question. which is basically asking why do you really need to have both the idea of an ad group and the idea of an ad group ad. So why do you actually need two separate objects for what is effectively a single ad with a single bidding values? So this is actually maybe not necessarily relevant for hotel ads, because actually hotel ads are being populated by what comes from a feed, but it is there because you have to have two separate entities, say for instance for search campaigns or for Gmail campaigns, where you actually can specify different ads inside the same ad group.
The creative text doesn't change though, right? I mean, the creative text is entirely generated from the feed.
Yeah. So yeah, it comes from a feed for hotel ads, but it can be changed for other campaign types.
And in theory, at some point in future, maybe we decide we want to change how the creative actually looks. You know, maybe we want to give you some extra control. We change what the search page layout looks like or something. And it would most likely be like on the creative itself, like on the ad object, where you would set those things. And don't forget, like the purpose of ad groups, they're there so that you can set targeting information differently for different segments of your campaign. So you want to target, you know, a particular age range differently from another, or set different location targeting criteria. Maybe if you're advertising in a particularly expensive area, you need higher bids, these kind of things, or if competition's higher. And all this, of course, this comes from like analyzing your data, looking at the reports, and particularly looking at the segments that we give you for your report. So you can see like what combination of parameters leads to higher performance. So you can break down, and maybe you start with just one ad group, but over time you break it down into many different ad groups. I suppose there's probably people listening to this who've got much more advanced ideas about how to do this, but that's the general idea about why ad groups are the way. Okay.
All right. Final question we have in our questions list is this one, which is basically, why are we guys so excited about this change, which I'm assuming is the change from the old AdWords API to the Google Ads API? And there's actually several reasons for this. So one of these is that the Google Ads API is actually using a technology which is called gRPC, which is the same technology that every other or most of our Google APIs use. So it's a huge step forward in terms of offering developers a cohesive and coherent experience when interacting with the Google APIs. And then it's also pretty cool, and we're really excited about this because it's really closer to how the backend infrastructure of the whole Google Ads platform looks like. So this, we hope at least, is going to help us deliver new features to the API way faster and give you as developers new and exciting ways to interact with Google Ads.
I wonder, Son, do you maybe have additional context to add here?
So the reason that we switched from hotel ads to Google Ads is that Google Ads can have much more capability than what we have right now with the hotel ads. So by switching from from hotel ads to Google Ads, we can reach more partners and serve them better.
Because you get the power of the rest of the Google Ads ecosystem.
That's right.
With fantastic engineers such as yourself. Great.
And then we also have a single API to rule them all.
Exactly.
So I just want to add something for the first question about the purpose of ad group ads.
Sure.
Please do.
For hotels, the ad group ad is just a way to tell our system to serve your ad group. So you don't have to supply anything other than just the ad group ad itself.
That's right. It's there effectively as a placeholder. There's no, for instance, if you compare it with search ads, there's no headline or description or headline 2 and description 2. Might change in the future. I don't know if there's any plans for that at the moment, but like as we evolve the product, any difference in the creative would probably surface there.
All right. So just like Devin mentioned now, we also have some resources slides, which is basically a list of links that you may find useful. So there's a link to our main dev site, which contains documentations and guides. And then there's also some links to examples on how to interact with hotel ads. And you also find some resources that you can use to get support. So the main one is the support forum for Google Ads and for the API. And the main source we suggest you use for updates is the Google Ads developer blog, which is where we usually post updates on new API releases and webinars like this.
For sure. Subscribe to the blog. You can get it in your email every day, and that's how we tell you about new features and changes coming in the Google Ads API.
Final slide is that we also have a new tool. So we try and always provide developers tools to make their developer experience easier and smoother. And one we're particularly excited about recently is what we call the Google Ads API Doctor. So it's basically a tool that makes sure, and it basically does a checkup of your OAuth setup, because we know that one of the most common issues that developers face when interacting with the Google Ads API is getting their OAuth setup right. It's something that may take some time. So we recently developed this utility that basically makes sure that your configuration is as it should be. And yeah, I would say that's it for today.
So may I add some more thing on the bit modifiers?
Sure.
So based on the way that a bit modifier can be created, there are two kinds of bit modifiers. One that you supply the resource name. The other one is the one that we don't supply the resource name. Instead, you set some fields in the request. For all hotels bit modifiers, you set the field in your request, and then the API will return, the API call will return the bit modifier ID for you.
Yes.
So to summarize, when you're specifying a bid modifier, you only need to specify the resource name in the case of it when it's a device, when it's a pre-created criteria that you're bidding on. But otherwise, correct me if I'm wrong here, Son, you're able to specify the fields directly in the bid modifier that you want to target.
Exactly.
Cool. Perhaps we should tidy up the documentation on that, actually. I wonder if that wasn't maybe clear in the docs.
Awesome.
Okay, good question. Thank you for that. Actually, I noticed there's one new question that came in at the end. Have you got it there? There we go.
Yeah.
Are hotel ads compatible with Google Ads tracking templates? Can we still match bookings on Gclid on our end? I'm almost 100% sure that that's the case. I'll verify with Son, though. I'll defer to you.
Yes, so we are using Gclid to track your conversion.
Exactly. So you can get the Gclid. I think you can get the Gclid directly on the landing page, and you can also get it in the tracking template via value track parameters. So yeah, I think the question is asking about tracking template. So for parallel tracking, where we send the tracking hit at the same time as the user goes to the landing page, like the user's already off in the landing page, meanwhile the tracking is running on the background. You can receive Gclid in there. And you can also get it on the landing page by specifying in either case with a value track parameter. And there's details of all the value track parameters available on the support.google.com page.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Let's see. Okay, I think just taking a quick skim through the questions, I think that pretty much covers everything.
Yeah.
So, one more. Will hotel ads be supported in BigQuery data transfer? That's a good question. So BigQuery data transfer is currently working on the old AdWords API. So effectively, I assume that this is related to a reporting question, like you want to get the statistics for hotel ads. So currently the answer is no, and I suppose that's probably why you're asking the question. Currently the answer is no, because the data transfer team, they're using the old API. They're using effectively the same endpoint on the AdWords API. I believe they are currently looking at options for how they can move their reporting stack over to the new infrastructure. In terms of timelines for that, I wouldn't think it would be dreadfully soon. I mean, if you need data, like if you need to do some analysis, I would have a little solution in place in the short term. Maybe you could use scripts.
Mm-hmm.
You could use Google Ads scripts to do that.
Yeah.
Oh no, because Google Ads scripts still uses AdWords reports as well, so that wouldn't work. Yeah, so you would have to build like a little client connector, something to download the data from Google Ads API and push it into BigQuery. Like I say, we don't have a firm timeline. it's actually not been approved at a product level yet. So I would definitely not hold your breath on that. Probably going to be, if I had to take a guess, 6 months,
Something like that.
Something like that, possibly even longer. So yeah, stay tuned. Stay tuned. We are looking at migrating the BigQuery data transfer object to Google Ads API.
Yep.
That was a really long way to say a short answer.
All right.
Yeah, I think we're finished. Quick look through ad group. There's a link that's not working. We'll get that fixed.
Yep. Thanks for noticing.
Yeah. So thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you to all the presenters. We hope to see you again for another webinar soon. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you.